as with many things that happened, there were a lot of reasons that I ended up thinking about taking King's Bounty and adding into it elements from an RPG, in this case from the Palladium fantasy role-playing game. And I don't remember really the order that this happened in. Somebody on my channel made a comment on one of my videos asking whether I had ever played this game, and I responded back that it was in my want in trade list, but I had sort of forgotten about it. I've got a ton of things in there, and the comment caused me to check on it again to see if I could get it, and it was available, and I got it. So that happened, and then additionally, and I don't remember which happened first, I had been playing Dawn of the Zed 2nd Edition, which was a game that recently came into my possession. I had never played it when it first came out. I never played the 3rd edition, and that caused me to do the video on RPG in a Box question mark, where I talked about Dawn of the Zeds as well as Pandora as being RPG in a Box experiences, and I had defined that in the context of those games as characters interacting with an environment, and environment interacting with characters to create a story. The origins of all of that thought is because I've been sent and queried and asked about many, many new games that are coming out that profess to be RPGs in a box, and that seems to be a goal of many board game designers these days, at least the ones that are approaching me about doing games on the channel, and I can see why. That's an interest, certainly, and it's an interest of mine as well. So all of these things came together, and when I got King's Bounty and opened it up, it is a fantasy, can't really see it here, it's a fantasy board game, Task Force Games, and it definitely, it's not a very complicated game, but even just opening it up, it's from 1991, and here are a look at the design and production credits. First of all, it was based on a computer game. I've got to look up online and see this. I don't remember whether I played that video game or not, probably, because I played a lot of video games, no surprise, back in the day. Opening this up, though, it comes with a rule book, and then it comes with a separate contract and events book. Now, actually, this repeats a lot of information in here, but it just sort of feels like an RPG to me, and the description of, there's a story first of all, and it's a basic, it's a fairly simple game with an objective that you play bounty hunters hunting down some, what are they called in the game? I can't remember. Fugitives, I guess, and bringing them for gold. And it is basically a victory point based game in terms of who gets the most at the end. And it comes with a map, which I'll show you in a moment, how you collect the bounty. So there are some stores in the various towns. There's villages, towns, capitals, hamlets, and here are the pre-generated bounty hunters with some of their stats. So just flipping through it, you also can modify and create your own bounty hunter, and I was excited about that because you could possibly play a giant, which is always a type of character I like to play, and it has stats. Very, very simple. And I got it out and I played it. There's some alternate endings for the game. There is built in a solo way of playing that is down here that has to do with the pressure in that is time passing, and you are marking off time in this way. And then you have the fugitives, and the fugitives are all listed here with their stats and some information about them, where they can be found, and a little bit of story about them, and also the reward for them. And then going back to the pre-generated bounty hunters, wherever they are, they too have a little story about them. But in reading, so I laid it out and I played a couple of turns, and it was perfectly pleasant, not terribly complicated, but it was enjoyable. However, it made me want more, and in thinking about wanting more, I thought immediately of Palladium. Now, why did I think of Palladium? Here is a look at the map of King's Bounty, and I've got it set up for play as I am going to play it, but I'm just showing it to you now because I want to tell you that what made me think of Palladium was this map, and in particular this area here. It made me think of ley lines because in the middle of this area here, Gren is indicated is a magic hamlet. And this right here was just really the spark that gave me the idea. It made me think of the ley lines in Palladium and magic circles and wards in Palladium, and could I somehow put onto this system the concept that my bounty hunters were doing more than just catching the fugitives, but they had quests that involved somehow doing something with creating a magic circle or making a ward or something. And that was really what then brought me to the Palladium rule set and the exploration that I began figuring out what I could take from that to place in conjunction with King's Bounty to make my little adventure game as I wanted to play it. When I posted the trailer for this video that I was going to do, I got a lot of comments from people who were excited because they had played Palladium, and let me say immediately that I am not somebody who has ever played Palladium. I have read it, and I own the second edition of the rules, and I'll show you here the the credits from the edition of the rules that I have. The original copyright is 83, and I've got the second edition. It was updated 88, 91, 96. The choice for this, as I said, originally came out of this idea. I remembered reading about the ley lines, which are somewhere in here. Also, I was interested in trying to find something that would be roughly contemporaneous with King's Bounty. This isn't exactly it. It was created before and then continued on, but modified. So and here we'll just look again at the credits, show you the proper credits here. What I am doing with this is basically using it as source material, as ideas, things that I want to pick up and use and map onto the King's Bounty characters and the structure of the King's Bounty game. And I'll just point out a few of the things that sort of stood out to me. The decision to use rules is based partially on theme, but also on what I think I can pull out and extract and still use as written, so that the structure and the decision making and the game design behind this remains, because I'm no game designer, and once I start it's one thing to pull out a rule kind of wholesale and try to apply it and use it. It's another thing to pull out a concept and try to apply it. That's a lot harder for me to do, and I find that what looks good at the beginning ends up being a dead end maybe somewhere, a few turns into the game, because I'm no game designer and just don't realize it. So that is part of the larger background idea about what I'm taking. So what I wanted to do was to make my 4 adventurers, I wanted to make them each minor psionic, have minor psionic abilities, and I followed this rule that they can take 2 powers from any of these categories: sensitive, physical, or healer. So you will see that in the game. And along with that, in order to use these abilities, they have to have something called ISP, which are inner strength points. And I have calculated the ISP for my characters based on the Palladium rules. So I will be following that, and then I'm assigning them the powers that I want them to have. I'm also going to use, because it is very easy to pull in the saving throw against these psychic attacks, so that for the fugitives, because there's basically, it just says non-psychics must roll 15 or higher to save against a psionic attack, and everybody's going to be a non-psionic, so that's it. That can be incorporated wholesale into the little mechanic that will come into play when one of my bounty hunters encounters a fugitive and tries to use their psionic power. So again, it's a very easy way for me to take something and add a little depth to it. Is it based on anything in this case more than a lucky roll? No, it's not. But it adds some flavor, and the way that I am playing it, my character, is going to need to expend their ISP to attempt the attack regardless, and they're going to therefore be playing down their ISPs, and then they're going to have to be able to heal or get them back. And in Palladium, the way that's done is through certain types of meditation or whatever. That's not coming into King's Bounty, but I will show you where they need to travel to the magical areas to recover their ISP. So there is, while it's simply luck-based, there is some choice involved. The other reason why I think Palladium can work here is it is skill-based, and it's a D100 a skill in many cases, and that is something that always appeals to me as a soloist, because I don't have any decision making beyond rolling the D100 to see whether something will work or not. So for example, I mean, I'm not choosing this skill, but here's a domestic skill of cooking, and you can see that it describes the skill, and it just tells you you have a 30% chance plus 5% per level of experience. I'm running level 1 characters here, so were I to assign this to one of my characters, it would be a 35% chance of success. And then it's up to me to create the tension in the game for how this can be used. And King's Bounty is an action point based game, so every character gets a certain amount of actions per turn. And I have decided that to use a skill costs, or to attempt to use a skill, costs a certain number of actions. So that is where you get the tension in. The bigger picture in my game that I'm playing is going to involve two parts of Palladium that are much more grandiose. This is magic circles and wards, and this is going to come into play in the King's Bounty game that I'm playing with the larger story. And when playing or designing an adventure game, what one is looking for, what I'm looking for at least, is not only a small scale motivation and mission, but something that is larger scale. And I want a bigger objective, and I want my characters to be working toward a greater goal. And in this case, it's going to be essentially 4 characters around the map playing co-op to each get their piece of the bigger goal. And that's going to involve being able to invoke these magic circle and a magical ward. How did I decide what this would be? Well, coming back to the King's Bounty rulebook, you can see that there are a list here of cities and locations, and these are indicated on the map, their name and where they are. And up here at the top, you see that there are 5 magic cities. And then there's a bunch of locations that are not cities, and it says nothing may be bought or sold at these locations. The cities and hamlets and such, here's the character sheet, are basically places where you can buy things. So in King's Bounty, the main purpose of these places is to have things for you to buy. Now, and again, here is a listing, for example, of who the fugitive is, their various stats, which we'll get into, and what money you get, whether they're dead or alive. So in this game as written, you're trying to get the most money. It's called King's Bounty. That makes total sense. But in looking through this, and as I was focusing on it, I came to focus on this because I felt that the presence of the 5 magic cities gave me anchor points for something larger, and gave me a goal for my characters to strive for, to create, not only to have them doing smaller quests, but for them to have to coordinate those quests and somehow involve these magic cities. And I mentioned the ley lines earlier, and on the map I had some concept of my characters needing to capture fugitives that would give them access to or information about the larger magic in the land, and how that could be wrestled together to make them more powerful, to fight perhaps a larger boss or something of that nature. And you can see here on the art for King's Bounty has this dragon, has one of the bounty hunters capturing a dragon. Now this is a dragon fugitive in the game, and I decided to pair him with one of the fugitives who's a giant in the game. So that will be the ultimate goal. And I'll just show you here because we're not by the map right now. This is Agronaut. He is a scourge, and he is going to be his distinguishing features are distinct sulfurous stench, fiery breath, red, glittery scaly hide, powerful wings, and tail. And clearly this is the only such character in the game. This is him pictured on the cover. He is going to be, as the game progresses, guarded by, protected by this fellow, Targ. This is Targ. Targ is, well, he's a giant, and he stares with dull, almost vacant eyes. He's a mountain giant of unsurpassed fighting prowess, but he is easily fooled. When attempting to capture Targ by trickery, that's a mechanic in King's Bounty, subtract 5 from your percentile roll. Well, we may not be able to capture him right away, because he is going to be working his way toward this great dragon who once terrorized the highlands, but now lives in the caverns of the lone mountain. Due to his magical nature and keen sense, trickery may not be used to capture him again. So my adventurers are going to need to buffer up the skills that they have, or the access that they have to magic, to ultimately defeat the dragon with his giant protector. And in order to do that, they are going to have to do a couple of things. And here is where things get a little bit messier. I'm showing you here the notes that I have made, and this came about after a whole bunch of scribbling and trying to figure out what made sense. I wanted 4 adventurers, and I wanted them with quests, and they've been chosen here, and I'll show you how I've worked them up in a moment. I wanted them to have to capture 8 fugitives as well as fulfill quests, and I came up with this number based on an indication in the King's Bounty rulebook about how many fugitives might be out in solo play depending on how many adventurers. It's not an exact, but it was mostly what I could manage. There are available to you, I think there's 32 fugitives in the game, and what I'm doing is just, I mean, it's the most I can manage, and certainly in trying to talk about it on video, I can manage even less than I would be able to do if I was just sort of playing it out on my table alone. There's a lot more I could have done with this, but this is what I've got. I also wanted some NPCs, and what I have done here is gone back to Palladium to give me some direction and clues as to what type of NPCs I might have. And there are some optional character classes here in Palladium. There's a merchant, a noble, a scholar, a squire, a vagabond. I was looking at those and reading about them in Palladium, and based on that, as well as the description of the bounty hunters, or excuse me, the fugitives here, I decided that some of these fugitives are actually going to be NPCs. They're not people that need to be captured. They're not exactly people who are immediately going to be on your side, but they are in the world potentially to help. And so I matched up as best I could to get a healer, a merchant. There's a librarian. There's somebody as described here in King's Bounty as a librarian, so he has become a librarian scholar. There were 3 fugitives who are described as having some type of magic ability, and so they will all be here. And then there was Scar, the dead pirate, and then somebody who's warrior death, so I've paired them together, basically taking information from King's Bounty that isn't put together, but trying to make it go together because it seemed thematic. So once I started to form the NPCs and get some sense of what they may be doing thematically, the story can begin to unfold. And then I needed to assign the adventures that I have to the fugitives that they need to find and give them a reason for that. And then I also need to give everybody in the world a reason for being, so that if one of my adventurers goes to visit them, I mean, the healer is the most obvious one, right? That's going to be somebody who will heal somebody. So there are mechanics for that that I have drawn either from King's Bounty or Palladium or put them together. The merchant is a little different because in King's Bounty there are already rules for what you can buy and where you can buy it, but my merchant is going to have something additional, and that is something that needs to be created, and in the game demo, if we get there, you'll see what that is. The librarian scholar is, to me, if you've watched enough of my videos, you know that I always end up having something. If there's a book involved or a library involved or whatever, that always becomes significant, and I often will bring that in. So that's going to be a focal point where one of my adventurers needs to bring the fugitives that he has captured to this librarian to get something to then bring that thing somewhere else. Essentially, the pick up and deliver mechanic is one that I think works nicely in this instance. It's not too complicated, but it gives people a reason to travel around the map, and so you'll see that coming into play as well. Again, the overall goal here is to create a story where the characters have motivations, there are milestones for the progression of the narrative, and of course there needs to be some tension, and there needs to be a race against time or some threat unfolding. And in this particular case, what I've decided to have that be is the weather. This is a game that takes place on a map. It's outside, and as you'll see as we progress, there are roles for the weather, and as time is passing, the weather is getting more stormy, and it is creating a situation where action points are lost and movement points are lost, and generally speaking, things are getting more difficult as time progresses. And if time runs out, and I'm going with the 100 turns that is coming from King's Bounty, if time runs out before my adventurers do what they are trying to do, then they will lose the game. I'll say also these little minis here, these lead minis that I'm using for some of the characters, these are not from King's Bounty. They are from the original Dungeon Quest Hero expansion, and they were featured in another video of mine. It's gotten a little complicated here in King's Bounty Land, but I want to show you just how I'm playing the game and then maybe a couple of examples of what a character is doing in it. The first thing up here that I have created is a weather table, and it's divided into 4 quadrants, and what the idea is that it's a D6 table. As time passes, the weather is going to get worse, and each of the effects of the weather, we have wind, fog, and clear, we've got stormy weather, we have sleet, and ultimately ice storms, will have impact in either how many action points characters get or how many movement points they get. Characters will get some benefits. For example, Bertram Stoneback here, who is a dwarf from the mountains, when it is windy, he's not impacted by that because he grew up on the mountains, and the mountains were very windy, and he's used to that. And similarly, for my other characters, I have that benefit. The reason that I did this was because looking at the map here, this is an expansive outside space. There are there's tons of mountains. It's an island area. There's forests and deserts and things. And I felt that weather needed somehow to come into play and to have its impact. So I have it here. Now, what I'm doing right now, and this is, as I said, this is a DIY kind of video. I'm putting it together, and this part of it is possibly still needs some adjustment. I'm still working off of the concept of 100 rounds of the game. I don't want to call it turns of the game because a round is just going to count for each character. So basically each character has 25 turns, and every 25 turns we go further and further into the chart here where it gets harder and harder to roll on the clear and have no weather impact. So this is what is here. Here I also have the order of who is acting in the turn, and I've gone back and forth with this. I have my adventurers here, and I have their paired up with the fugitives that they are matched with here. And ultimately what I've decided on is that each time, so for each 4 turns of the game or 4 rounds of the game, again, this terminology is kind of vague. I've do a randomization, and when I pull something out, green is my adventurers and red are the fugitives. So I'm sort of doing a blind draw, and I'll pull something out, and I will place this number 1. Whatever I pull out starts at the top. So this is, as it turns out, this is the order I have it listed here, but that wouldn't necessarily be the case. And then I just keep drawing. Well, this isn't a great example because it's coming in order, but I just keep drawing until I get my order. So for here, I will follow this order, and then it will just alternate. So I'm going to always start with my adventurers, and in this case, then the fugitives would follow. So we'll just keep drawing and placing, and we will have the order for these 4 turns, and then this is going to come in at the number 4. So the way this works is it does go back and forth, and I will start with Thigal, and then in response it will be these 2 fugitives. They're not necessarily matched up with him, but they're going to be moving around. So this is sort of to simulate my adventurers are moving and the fugitives are moving, and then I'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, but it'll go 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. So you get that. As I said, I toyed with doing a 1 to 8 roll, and I actually have my D8 out here, and I was sort of using that to just see whether that made sense. But having the fugitives moving around too much in a row didn't really work, and the same thing with the adventurers. One of the weaknesses here, one of the many weaknesses here in my little DIY project is the kind of quote-unquote AI of the fugitives. Loosely what I've got, and I'll show you pointing to the map, is they initially try to move toward each other, and then when they are together, they try to move away from the bounty hunter that is tracking them. I had set up here just sort of, working out who my adventurers are and excuse me, what their quest is and who the fugitives are that are involved in this quest. So, for example, based on the King's Bounty rules, as I mentioned, Bertram Stoneback, he needs to track down his former companions here, and he needs to bring them somewhere. They are going to be part of the larger story of getting together the elements necessary to make the magic circle that is going to be necessary to try to fight the combined powers of the giant and the dragon. So the dragon and his giant guardian together. The goal is to capture them with the use of this magic circle, and then everybody has to be getting something that is part of that. And Eden, the elf here, this is a forest-themed quest, and it's vague. I haven't really developed this fully, and maybe if I played in more detail, I would do that. But basically, for what I'm talking about here, I'm going off of what's provided to me, and that is that he has to, the fugitives that he is involved with is this Grinwood, which is a sort of giant wolf, and this guy Dayar Stahl, whose description had something to do with the forest. So I tried to pair them thematically, and he needs to track them down and bring them together. Bringing them together is going to produce the sort of elemental forest or land magic that is the component of this magic circle, etc. These people are trying to get the book that has the instructions, and then this last one here, which is involved with the astrologer who made the faulty prediction, is also going to bring the element of sort of predicting the future of this and envisioning the capture of the dragon and the giant. And when all these things are brought together, then the powers of that circle can be brought to bear to aid the four adventurers working together in this final battle. Is this a deep story? No. Are there holes in it? Absolutely. But it is enough for me to give them something to do, both minor and major, and create individual goals along the way for a bigger goal. Each character gets a character card, and I'm just going to show you one of them because this video is already getting a little long. As an example, though, this is the dwarf here, the mountain dwarf. I already talked about the fact that he gets benefit when it is windy. He does not have to deal with the impact of wind, which is for everybody else losing an action. He doesn't have to deal with that. He's given 7 action points per the King's Bounty rules, and we track these action points down here. You can't quite see it, and they allow things to happen during the course of somebody's turn. These are his starting stats. They stand for strength, spirit, and skill. And reputation is a value that's associated with spirit. And this is going to come into play very importantly in my game, because during the course of the game, our fugitives are going to be encountering bounty hunters or I should say our bounty hunters will be encountering fugitives that are not quote-unquote on their list. And if they can't sneak by them, which is by rolling under their stealth value, they must do combat. And if they successfully capture them, their reputation is going to suffer for that, because this is meant to be a cooperative game. They're all working together. And if they do successfully capture a fugitive that isn't quote-unquote their fugitive, they then have to bring it to the adventurer who needs to capture it. But while that's happening, their reputation suffers, and this has impacts in other parts of the game. The 20 pack refers to how much they can carry, and these are all values based on King's Bounty rules. Purchasing, he started with 800 money and decided to make these purchases that gave him these additional stat benefits. So his strength after getting the battle axe and the armor is 13, and his spirit rises to 6, although when your spirit rises as a result of something you're carrying, your reputation does not. So reputation is linked to spirit only initially, and then it is impacted by what you do in the game, not what you carry. And finally, his skill value is staying the same. So he has increased his strength with the battle axe and the armor. Coming in from the Palladium rules, we talked about the inner strength points. This was just based on a random roll using Palladium rules. He got 13 of them. I gave him 1 additional skill. I gave everybody an additional skill. Again, coming in from Palladium, I already talked about that. And I tried to make it thematic. So he is a dwarf, and he has an underground tunneling skill, and this is at 40%. So it's a very simple mechanic. I can roll the D100, and if I roll at or below this number, he is successful at whatever he's trying to do. It's going to cost 2 actions to try to do it. And in this case, what he gets to do is to tunnel from a major point to a major point. So looking here at, I don't know how close it is. I'll have to come in a little bit closer to show you the movement on this map. There are these signposts here that you can see that count as 1 movement. But for the dwarf, he can go from a major point to a major point if he wants, by tunneling, if he is successful there. And in some cases, it will be faster to do that. But if he fails on the roll, he still has given up his 2 actions. He, like everybody else, is a minor psionic character, and in this case, he has, for 4 ISP, the ability to resist fatigue. And what this means is he can roll 1d6 and get some more travel action out of it if he is successful. And again, either way, he will spend those ISP. And he can also summon inner strength, meaning he can resist up to 2 damage. So this is how I set up the dwarf, and bringing in, again, things from Palladium as well as King's Bounty. Not a lot, but just enough to flesh out the character and make it thematic. And I did this for all the characters that are here. And we'll just take a quick look at my elf, for example. So he is a forest elf and can resist the fog effects when that happens. He's got skills for detection of ambush, so he can generate initiative if he rolls successfully on that. And his psionics have to do with both healing himself and healing others. So he's a little bit more of a magical character in that way. And I gave him sort of what I would think would be thematically appropriate things. He's got some lockpicks to increase his stealth, and he's got a long sword and a large shield, and then the attendant increased values based on those things. So there's a look into 2 of the character sheets that I created, and everybody has one. I will take you through a turn or 2 of the game, and I had moved this for filming, but I'm keeping track of the turns. Again, there's 100 of them. With this, and so we have gone through, I have already played through the first, I don't know what to call them, set of turns or whatever. Everybody's gone once. Now what I need to do, the first thing I need to do is roll on the weather table. I'm still up here, so this is a d6 roll, and we will do that roll and see. We got a 1, which means it's windy out, so I just place it up here to remind myself the impact of wind is going to be -1 action to most characters, just anybody except the mountain character, as I said. And the first up here for this turn is Seagull, is going to be taking her turn. She is from the desert, and as such, she gets a benefit in storm. She doesn't get a benefit for dealing with wind. So she's down 1 action point, and she started with 7, as does everybody. So I'm going to keep track of her action points here. So because it's windy out, she's only going to have 6 action points, and you need to use action points to do anything in the game. She is, as a reminder, her situation is that I've lost my pointer. So here she is, and she is a human adventurer, and what she needs to do is to make her way up to this area here. We've got Zoshim in his hideout. Now, he is not going to be moving. He's going to be static and staying there. She needs to collect him, and then she also needs to collect somebody else who's down at the bottom of the map, but she's choosing to go this way first. And the goal is to pick him up and bring him back down. This is sort of the, well, you don't see it on the map here, but this magical hamlet of Gren is the center of operations here, where everybody is meant to meet to create this magic circle. And she's just going to make her way up. So it's pretty straightforward at the moment, but this is early on in the game. The first thing that you do in the game for everybody is to roll on the events table. And this is from King's Bounty, there is this contract and events book, and it has a bunch of D100 tables, and they are indicated by terrain type. So this, for example, is the ocean, the bay, and the deep events table. There are river events and marsh and swamp events, mountain events, so it's by terrain, forest, woodland, desert, and then of course the city events. Now, you are instructed that if you are in a city, she is in a town now, and that means a city per the rules. She could roll on the city table, which is what we're going to do because it's generally safer, but she could also opt to roll on the table of one of the terrain types that she is adjacent to here, or that it is in. So in this case, that would be the, well, Plains doesn't have an event. Actually, I don't think she can because this is surrounded by plains. She has to roll on the city table. We're sort of near a desert, but I don't think that quite counts. In any case, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to roll our D100 on this table, and it's a little cluttered here, so let's see how we do this. We roll a 36, and we will see what that is. So again, we see this is all straight from King's Bounty, and this is how the King's Bounty turns begin also. So we check out the city events. We rolled a 36, and this is what we get. There will be an archery tournament held in Meln, North Marin Forest, at the end of your next turn. All bounty hunters in Meln at the time may participate, provided that they own a longbow. To compete, each player must save against his or her skill using only the bow, magical or not, as a modifier 10 times. Wow. To beat the local competition, 8 out of the 10 saves must be successful. Provided this is done, the character with the most successful saves wins. There's a tie, blah, blah, blah. 800. Wow, 800 money. Well, that's interesting. Now, where is that Meln? So, again, this is where the, well, I've got to find, oh, here it is. Here's Meln. We're actually not too far away. Now, do we have a bow? Let's see. We don't think we have a bow. But does anybody have a bow? Well, our gnome has a bow. I think only our gnome has a bow. So the gnome, who is, let's see, so anybody can participate here. And now this brings up some great points that I want to make. First of all, our character here, she doesn't have a long bow, and she doesn't have the money to get one before the end of her next turn. She would have to go to a capital city to buy one for 200, and she does not have 200 left. Now, she could potentially sell something or trade, but I don't think she's going to do that. However, our gnome down here, if you can see him, right down here, he does have, well, he doesn't have a longbow right now. He's got a crossbow, but he's got money to save, and he can actually make his way up. So Meln is right here. Let's see. Right. Meln is up here. He is going to need to trade something he's got to get a bow, and he has to do it in a capital, but coming up the coast here, he could end up in Marinhone in one turn. He would have enough movement to get there because it's going to be held at the end of the next turn, and then he could make his way up to Meln to potentially compete in this competition to get 800 gold. Now, is this something he would do? Well, possibly, because it's the beginning of the game still, and he's got time to deal with his other quests, and also his stat here, his current skill level is 8. He would have to probably get rid of this crossbow to have enough money to buy the longbow, and in any case, you could only use that modifier, so he would be having to save against the skill level of 9. Now, per the King's Bounty rules, what saving is on a roll of 2d10, you have to roll below or at your number to count as a save. So it would be 8 out of 10 times with 2d10s rolling and an 8 or less. Those odds are not great. However, my gnome has a psionic capability, and this is clairvoyance, and it's the way it is brought into this game is that he can anticipate, sort of with a limited amount of time, something that happens in the future. He has a 60% chance of doing that, spending 4 ISP, and he has a total of 17 ISP. And I think interpreting this for the game, and again, this is homebrew, so there's lots of interpretation here, I would interpret that as he could opt for 4 ISP to attempt a clairvoyant look into the future to know exactly how to get his bow to the target and therefore get a success using his clairvoyant skill in addition to his archery or adding it onto it. So that is a way where the two sets of rules might intersect to give an outcome for this event. So potentially he could do that and expend his ISP that way to modify a roll or whatever to get potentially that money. And this also brings up a question of what's that money for? And we're going to go back to Palladium here to look just briefly at the, there are things you can buy here. There's magic potions, and there is basically an alchemy shop. In King's Bounty, one of my NPCs that I brought in from the very beginning is a traveling merchant, and he is on the map somewhere. I have to remind myself of who he is, but let's see. He's Boren the Traveler. This is him right here. So this is Boren the Traveler. Now, he is going to be selling things basically from the Palladium magic shop. One thing I haven't 100% figured out is the scale of the pricing is off. So I don't, it's probably going to be at a 50 or 75% discount from the pricing in here. I haven't figured this part out yet, and that's just going to be a kind of do as I go sort of thing. But some of the magic items that he has for sale, well, he'll be selling anything that's in the Palladium book, and then it will be up to me to interpret how much it costs and what it could be used for. But those items clearly are going to be more expansive in this game than the relatively limited number of items that are for sale in King's Bounty, all of which are listed here at the back. You can pause the video if you really want to see what they are, but they're relatively limited. So to make it more interesting, because I always like to go shopping in games, I do have this traveling merchant. Again, how he's going to travel, right now I just have him sitting here, and this is something I need to develop. As I play through this, I'll have to just tinker with it to make it a little more fluid. But in any case, back to her, that was the event that she encountered, and what she can do now is use her 6 actions to move, and her goal, again, to remind us, is to come up here, and she's going to need to capture her fugitive and do her movement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She basically can move. Well, she's got this river here. Let's see, she'll probably go this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's a boat crossing I think she'll have to deal with, but this is where she's going to go up to. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. It's a little hard to say. She's going to have to, now luckily she has some money. She's going to have to pay 50 to take that boat across the river or go up the river to his hideout, but that will be her next turn, and that concludes all the actions that she has in this turn. So she has now taken her turn, and I'll just show you to keep clear how this goes. So this indicates she's taken her turn, and then the next one up are these 2 fugitives. Now again, getting back to my own problems with how I'm developing this, at this point, really in just one turn, these 2 fugitives have met up, and I don't actually have a plan for them. They're going to simply sort of go up the coast away from the bounty hunter who is following them, and that is Bertram here. So Bertram himself is right here. So they're just going to be traveling up the coast. They travel at a rate of 1d4. So we just roll a 1d4. They're traveling together. So they got a 4 movement, and they will be taking their turn and traveling up here through the river, I guess, just as far as they can go. Again, perhaps this isn't the best solution, but this is what I've got. So I'm taking this. They're on a boat. They abstractly pay for it. 1, 2, 3. They're really up to the top of the river here with this movement. So this is how they're getting away, and they are as such. So that was their turn. And now it is Minden's turn, and let's see, what's he up to? So this is our forest gnome, and he's right here. He's the one who is thinking about getting the crossbow to get to the tournament, and I think that's probably what I'm going to have him do. Before, the video is getting quite long, and before I conclude it, I want to just show you what happens with combat, because I do want to explain how combat works, since I'm sure people will be interested, and I didn't show it here in the video so far. It pretty much comes wholesale from the King's Bounty rules. It reminds me a little bit of Runebound because there are 3 characteristics and you are attempting to win 2 of the 3 characteristics to be successful in combat. That said, it is a little different than Runebound. You've got strength, spirit, and skill, and you on the predetermined on the fugitives, and those characteristics are static. And then you have your own stats here, which will change during the course of the game depending on various things. What you're doing is you're taking a d10 and you're rolling and adding your value, and you must exceed the value of the fugitive to have it count as a success. If you meet the value, it's a tie, and the tie goes to the fugitive. So the first thing we're going to do is see, are we stronger than this guy? And we roll a 6. So a 6 plus an 11 is a 17. No, we lost that. We are not stronger than this guy. And do we have more spirit than him? We roll a 9 here on spirit. So a 9 and a 6 is a 15. And again, no, we are not exceeding his spirit. He has more vibrancy and spirit than us, so that's 2 losses for us. And then finally, whoops, we rolled another poor roll here on our skill. We roll only a 3. So in this case, we have a loss in 3 areas, which is the biggest loss that you can have. Now, looking here at the King's Bounty rules, we see that this is what happens when you lose characteristics in a duel. The loss of a duel, depending on how many characteristics you lose it in, causes you to lose a certain number of action points moving forward. And the rules here are a little unclear to me. The way that I play the rule is the action points come off your next turn regardless. Even if you have if a duel happens and you have remaining action points for your turn, you cannot spend them to recover that turn, because to me that doesn't seem like a penalty enough. So you will be losing them in the next turn, and that is the consequences of combat. Now you can see just from this little taste of the game that it isn't necessarily combat centric. What will happen is combat will ensue when you need to capture your fugitive. So for example, with getting back to the first player here, next turn she is going to have combat with her fugitive here and see if she can capture him. And this success or failure will follow the rules of King's Bounty. If she fails on that, there is a further consequence, which means that he will escape and go somewhere, and per the rules of this King's Bounty set, I'll show you how that works. We turn to his fugitive stats here, and it will explain that if he's going to be escaping, we do a d10 roll, and this tells you where he flees to, and then we will have to continue to chase him down. So all of that is per the King's Bounty rules. Of course, she may have other things that she's doing along the way. She may encounter other people's fugitives along the way, and if so, she will combat them if she can't sneak around them, and that could be a detriment to her reputation, which has further impact. So this is a sort of look inside what I've been doing here to play this game, and as you can see, the rule book, the rule set, and events set from the King's Bounty itself offers a certain amount of RPG flavor, but with my add-on of the Palladium materials, rules, skills, and abilities, I'm able to create a situation where there are larger goals as well as the more immediate goals. And what I'm trying to do is give motivations to the characters that are greater than their own personal motivations, to have milestones in the game of collecting the magical elements that need to come together to make the magic circle, and basically having a variety of different challenges that are all going to end up with what I started with, basically, and what I talked about at the beginning of the video, which is just when I saw this map and something about this with the magical hamlet in the middle made me think of ley lines, which made me get to Palladium, which made me get to the magic circles and the magic wards, and trying to figure out how I could have 4 adventurers working together to create a larger magical situation in this land that would ultimately, I need an end game condition for what I'm doing here, because it is really an RPG adventure game and not just an open-ended world. The larger condition of having to combat the dragon and his giant protector, and clearly the adventurers are going to need help, because we saw from that combat example the stats are, as you would expect, pretty imbalanced. So what we're going to have in the end is the dragon stats, which are already pretty high, plus the stats of Targ, the giant, who is his bodyguard in effect. So that's going to be all added together. So clearly we need some help from magic to even have the possibility of success there, and that is their bigger goal, and that is the adventure game that I am working on and will continue to play, which is a mashup of King's Bounty and Palladium.